Claude responded. I drove out to my son's place on a Tuesday. Nothing special about the day except that I'd promised to drop off a fishing rod I'd fixed up for my grandson. I drove out to my son's place on a Tuesday. Nothing special about the day except that I'd promised to drop off a fishing rod I'd fixed up for my grandson. Nothing special, and yet I still think about the drive there more than almost any other drive I've taken in my 71 years. Because 4 hours later, I would be sitting in a pediatrician's office listening to a man tell me my grandson had been given enough antihistamine in his system to knock out an adult twice his size, and that if it had happened one more time that month, we might not have been sitting there talking about it at all. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, because you deserve the whole thing, not just the part that hurts. My name is Walter. I'm 68 years old, retired now going on 6 years from a plant that made hydraulic parts outside of Dayton, Ohio. 41 years on that floor, and when they gave me the send-off party, my son Michael stood up in front of everybody and said his old man never missed a day of work in his life. That's not quite true. I missed two, both times because his mother was in the hospital having his sisters, but I appreciated him saying it. Michael is my only son. Good boy. Better man than I was at his age, if I'm honest. He works in logistics now, manages a warehouse distribution center about 40 minutes from where I live, and he married a woman named Denise about 9 years ago. Denise came with a son from a previous relationship, Cole, who was 3 when they married and is 8 now, and Michael took to that boy like he was his own from day one. Never once heard him say stepson, always just my son. I want you to understand that, because it matters for what comes later. Cole calls me Grandpa Walt, has since the day he could talk. And out of all 6 grandchildren scattered across my 2 kids, Cole is the one who runs to the truck first when I pull into the driveway. There's just something between us. Maybe it's because Michael married into that boy's life the same way I like to think I earned my place as somebody other than the second husband a long time ago with somebody else. Maybe it's because Cole's got my late wife, Carol's eyes, soft brown, always a little sad even when he's laughing. I don't know. I just know I love him the way you love your own blood, and more. So there I was, that Tuesday afternoon, pulling into the driveway with a fishing rod in the truck bed, and a bag of butterscotch candies in my coat pocket because Cole likes them, and Denise doesn't like me giving him candy, so we have an arrangement where I sneak them to him behind the shed. Denise's car wasn't there. Michael's truck wasn't there either. He was still at work, wouldn't be home till 6. It was just Cole and the babysitter, a young woman named Priya, who watches him some afternoons, when Denise picks up extra shifts at the dental office where she works as a hygienist. Priya let me in, said Cole was in his room, said he'd had a rough day at school, seemed tired. I didn't think much of it. Kids get tired. I found him lying on his bed on top of the covers, still in his school clothes, staring at the ceiling with his eyes half open in that glassy way kids get when they're fighting off a fever. I sat down next to him, put my hand on his forehead, no fever, cool as anything, and he turned his head real slow, like his neck weighed 100 pounds, and he looked at me. Grandpa Walt, he said, and his words were slurring together just slightly, the way a man's words slur after his 3rd drink. I don't feel good after my snack. Now, I want to tell you, at that moment, I still thought maybe he'd caught a stomach bug at school. Kids pass things around like they're getting paid for it. I asked him what he had for a snack. Mommy's special juice, he said. She gives it to me on the bad days. The days I don't listen good. I sat very still. What bad days, buddy? When I don't want to go to bed, or when I'm too loud when she's on the phone with Uncle Ronnie. I did not know an Uncle Ronnie. I want to be honest with you about what went through my head in that moment, because I think it's important. My first thought was not suspicion. My first thought was confusion. I thought maybe it was a cough syrup, something over the counter, something a stressed mother gives a rowdy kid to settle him down before a long night, which I'm not going to pretend that's never happened in any family I've known. Times were different when I raised my kids, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend I never gave my daughter a spoonful of something pink to help her sleep on a car trip once. But something about the way Cole said it bad days, the way he'd apparently learned to categorize his own behavior around whether or not he'd get the special juice, sat wrong in my stomach like a swallowed stone. I asked him if he could show me the cup. He pointed to his nightstand, where there was a plastic cup, the kind with a lid and a bendy straw, still had maybe an inch of purple liquid at the bottom. Grape, by the smell of it. I picked it up, and I looked at it like it was going to tell me something just by looking at it, which of course it wasn't. "Does Daddy know about the special juice?" I asked him. He shook his head. "It's just for me and Mommy. It's our secret so Daddy doesn't get stressed about work." That's the sentence, ladies and gentlemen, that's the one that changed the whole afternoon for me. Because an 8-year-old boy does not invent, on his own, the concept of keeping a secret from his father specifically so his father won't be stressed about work. Somebody taught him to say that. Somebody built that sentence and put it in his mouth like a coin they wanted him to carry around and never spend. I did not raise my voice. I did not call Denise right then and start screaming into the phone, though God knows every muscle in my body wanted to. I've lived long enough to know that the first hour after you find something like this is the most dangerous hour there is, because it's the hour where you're most likely to do something you can't take back, something that tips your hand before you've got a plan, something that gives the person you're worried about time to clean up whatever they need to clean up before anybody with authority walks through that door. So here is what I did instead. I told Cole I was going to take him to get some ice cream, which made his eyes light up even through whatever fog he was under, and I told Priya I was taking him out for a bit and I'd have him back before Denise got home. Priya, God bless her, was 17 years old and had no earthly reason to question a grandfather taking his grandson for ice cream. I put that cup of purple juice in a sandwich bag from Cole's own kitchen, sealed it, and put it in the glove compartment of my truck like it was a piece of evidence, because in my heart, that's exactly what I already believed it was. I did not take Cole for ice cream. I took him to urgent care. I know how that looks, taking a boy somewhere under a pretense, but I want you to understand, I was not thinking like a grandfather anymore in that moment. I was thinking like a man who'd spent 41 years reading gauges and pressure valves for a living, a man who knew that when a needle sits somewhere it shouldn't, you don't wait around hoping it fixes itself. You act, and you document, and you figure out the rest after the reading's confirmed. The urgent care doctor, a young man named Dr. Osei, took one look at Cole, the slurred speech, the drowsiness, the way his pupils responded slow to the penlight, and didn't hesitate. He ran a full panel. He asked me straight out, not unkindly but firmly, whether I suspected the child had ingested something he shouldn't have. I told him what Cole told me. I gave him the juice cup. We waited almost 2 hours in that little exam room. Cole fell asleep on my lap somewhere in there, and I sat with my hand on his back, feeling him breathe, counting the rise and fall of his ribs the way you count something when you're too scared to think about anything else. I thought about all 6 of my grandbabies in that room. I thought about Carol, gone 4 years now, and how she used to say that God gives grandparents a second chance to notice the things we were too busy or too tired to notice the first time around with our own kids. Dr. Osei came back in with a face I did not like. He sat down across from me instead of standing, which is never a good sign with doctors, I've learned. The talk screen showed diphenhydramine Benadryl, essentially the over-the-counter stuff, but at a level that was, in his words, significantly elevated for a child of this weight and age, consistent with either an accidental large ingestion or repeated intentional dosing over time. He asked me how long this had been going on. I told him I honestly did not know, that I'd only just found out that afternoon, but that based on what Cole had said to me, it sounded like it might have been happening for a while. He told me that antihistamines like this, in high or repeated doses in small children, can cause serious cardiac and neurological complications, and in rare cases can be fatal, especially if combined with other medications or given while the child has any kind of respiratory illness. He said the levels in Cole's system that day were not immediately life-threatening but were, again in his words, nothing to take lightly, and nothing that happens by accident more than once. He told me he was legally obligated to file a report with Child Protective Services given what I'd told him and what the lab showed. I told him good. I told him to file it that same day, that hour if he could. Now, here's where I imagine some of you watching this are already getting impatient with me. The way some folks got impatient with a story a lot like this one that made the rounds not long ago about another grandfather and another grandchild. I can already hear you asking why I didn't march straight to Denise's door and confront her right then, or call the police from the parking lot of that urgent care center. And I understand that instinct. I really do. If it were only about my own anger, I'd have done exactly that. But it wasn't just about my anger. It was about Cole. And it was about making sure that whatever happened next, nobody could ever say later on that we'd acted rashly, or that Cole's own words had been the only piece of evidence, easily disputed by a woman who could simply say her son had a wild imagination or was repeating something he saw on television. I wanted a paper trail nobody could argue with. I wanted lab results with a timestamp. I wanted a mandated reporter's signature on a CPS filing before Denise ever knew we were on to her, because the moment she knew, whatever she'd been doing, and however long she'd been doing it, she would have every opportunity in the world to destroy the evidence and coach that little boy on a new story. So I did not confront her. I took Cole for real ice cream after all, because I'd promised, and because his hands had finally stopped shaking, and I brought him home 20 minutes before Denise's shift ended, exactly like I'd told Priya I would. I did not call Michael that night either. I know that sounds like the harder thing to explain, and it is. My son had just finished a 10-hour shift, managing a warehouse crew short 2 people because of a stomach flu going around. I knew that calling him at 9 o'clock at night with half a story and no proof would only give him a sleepless night and possibly send him storming into that house before we had anything solid to stand on. I needed one more day. Just one. That night, I called an old friend of mine, a retired police detective named Ray Alvarez, who I'd known since our boys played Little League together 20 years back. Ray had spent 18 years working family violence cases before he retired, and there was nobody in this world I trusted more to tell me straight whether I was overreacting or whether I was sitting on something serious. I met Ray at a diner the next morning at 7, before Cole was even awake for school. I brought him the discharge paperwork from the urgent care visit and told him everything Cole had said. Ray didn't say much while I talked. He just nodded and took notes on a little pad he still carried out of habit, old cop instinct that never leaves a man. When I finished, Ray set his pad down and said the words I will remember until the day I die. Walter, this isn't a one-time thing, and it isn't about discipline. This is a pattern, and patterns like this almost always have a why behind them that's got nothing to do with the kid at all. He was right. Though it took us 3 more days working together, Ray making a few calls to contacts he still had, me quietly gathering what I could to find the why. The why was a man named Ronnie Castellano. Denise had been seeing him for the better part of 8 months. Not some stranger from a bar, a man from her own gym, a personal trainer. She'd started seeing 3 mornings a week, under the story that she was finally getting back in shape. Ray's contact pulled receipts, plain and simple. Motel charges on a card Denise kept separate from the joint account she shared with Michael, timed almost exactly to the afternoons Cole came home glassy-eyed and slurring his words. The pattern was this. On the mornings Denise planned to meet Ronnie, she'd dose Cole's afternoon juice heavy enough that he'd sleep hard once she brought him home from the sitter, giving her the privacy she needed without Priya or Michael ever suspecting a thing, since a sleepy, sedated 8-year-old asks no questions and needs no supervision. She'd been doing it. According to the pharmacy records, Ray's contact pulled records showing repeated over-the-counter purchases of the same children's antihistamine, far more than any single child with seasonal allergies would ever need for at least 7 months. 7 months of my grandson being drugged so his mother could carry on an affair in peace. I want to tell you, when Ray laid all of that out for me on that diner napkin, doing that terrible arithmetic out loud, I had to walk outside and stand in the parking lot for a good 5 minutes before I trusted myself to speak to another human being. Not because I was sad, though God knows I was that too, thinking of Cole alone in that bed, feeling his own heart race from a dose no child should ever carry. I was angry in a way I have not been angry since I was a much younger man, the kind of angry where you understand, just for a moment, why some men do things they can't undo. But I did not do anything I couldn't undo. I want that understood, because I think it matters, and because I think too many people confuse justice with revenge, when really they are 2 very different animals wearing the same coat. I called Michael that night. I sat him down at my kitchen table, The same table his mother and I bought secondhand back in 1987, and I told him everything, start to finish, with the CPS case number, the urgent care report, the pharmacy records Ray had documented, and the motel receipts laid out in front of him like a hand of cards nobody wants to be dealt. My son did not yell. He did not throw anything, though I watched his hands shake so hard he had to set his coffee cup down twice. He sat very still and read every single page twice, and when he finished, he looked up at me and said, "Dad, why didn't you call me the first night?" And I told him the truth. I told him I was afraid that if he confronted her before we had everything locked down, she'd have a lawyer and a story ready before CPS or anyone else ever laid eyes on that boy again, and we might lose our shot at proving any of it, and worse. We might lose time with Cole while the courts sorted out who said what to whom. Michael sat with that for a long moment, and then he said something that I think about more than almost anything else in this whole ordeal. He said, "You did for him what I should have been doing all along." I was so busy being grateful she took a chance on a single guy raising another man's kid that I stopped watching close enough. I told him that's exactly the trap good men fall into, the ones who love hard and assume the people they love are loving just as hard back. It is not a character flaw to trust your wife. It is only a mistake if you keep trusting her after the evidence tells you not to. What happened after that moved faster than I expected, mostly because CPS had already opened their file the same day as the urgent care report, and once Michael filed for emergency custody backed by a police report Ray helped him put together properly, the family court judge did not need much convincing. There is something almost sacred about watching a judge look at pharmacy records spanning 7 months, a talk screen with a timestamp, and a motel receipt log, and simply say, out loud, in a courtroom, "This is not in dispute." No shouting, no drama. Just facts laid out so plainly that even the lawyer Denise eventually hired sat down without much of a fight. Denise was charged with child endangerment. I won't pretend to you that the wheels of justice moved as fast as any of us wanted. There were continuances. There was a plea agreement eventually reached that spared Cole from having to testify in open court, which honestly, all of us, even in our anger, agreed was the more important thing. She lost primary custody. She's required now to have all visitation supervised, and she completed, or is still completing, a court-mandated program, though I'll be honest and tell you I have not personally forgiven her, and I don't know that I owe anybody that. Ronnie Castellano, for what it's worth, stopped returning anybody's calls the week the story became a police matter, instead of a private one. Some men are only brave when nothing's at stake. Cole lives with Michael full-time now. Denise sees him twice a month, in a supervised visitation room with a caseworker present, and from what Michael tells me, those visits are calm, if not exactly warm. Cole doesn't ask about the special juice anymore. He asked me once, a few months after everything settled, why Mommy isn't allowed to be alone with him, and I told him the truth in the smallest words I could find, that his mommy made choices that weren't safe for him, and that choices like that have to be fixed slowly, with grown-ups watching to make sure everybody's safe, and that none of it, not one piece of it, was ever his fault. He nodded like that made sense to him, the way kids do when they're trying on an idea to see if it fits, and then he asked if we could go fishing with the rod I never actually got to give him that Tuesday, since it had been sitting in my truck bed through this whole ordeal. We went that weekend. Caught nothing but a couple of bluegill too small to keep, but I have never in my life enjoyed an empty stringer so much. I think about that day at the urgent care office more than I think about almost anything else at my age, and here's what I've come to believe, for whatever it's worth to any of you listening. We spend so much of our lives assuming the people closest to a child are the safest people for that child to be around, simply because of the role they hold. Mother, father, trusted sitter. But a title is not a guarantee. Love is not automatically safety. The only thing that actually protects a child is somebody paying close enough attention to notice when the words coming out of that child's mouth don't sound like a child's words at all, when they sound like a lesson somebody older taught them to recite. Cole taught me that lesson without even knowing he was teaching it, lying there half-conscious on top of his covers, telling me it was a secret so Daddy wouldn't get stressed. Children do not invent secrets like that. Somebody hands them that secret, the same way you'd hand a child something too heavy for them to carry, and then walks away expecting them to carry it forever without ever putting it down. I'm just grateful mine put it down with me. If there is one thing I would ask of anyone hearing this story, it's simply this. Pay attention to the small, strange sentences that come out of the children in your life. Not every strange sentence means something is wrong. Most of the time, kids are just kids, saying odd things because their imaginations run faster than their filters. But sometimes, every once in a great while, a strange sentence is a flare going up in the dark, and somebody has to be watching the sky closely enough to see it before it burns out. I was watching that Tuesday. I thank God every single day that I was. Claude responded. A small child rarely lies about the strange things that happen to them they simply don't know how to yet. A small child rarely lies about the strange things that happen to them they simply don't know how to yet. Sometimes the softest whisper carries the loudest warning, if only we slow down long enough to hear it. Loving someone means watching closely, not just trusting blindly. And when we do notice, when we do act with patience and courage together, a family can heal and small hands can hold a fishing rod again, light and free. A small note for you. This story was written and fictionalized by AI for entertainment purposes, while still hoping to bring you a warm and meaningful life lesson.